Good evening. My name is Tom Kelly, and I am the Chief Sustainability Officer at UNH and also the founding Executive Director of the UNH Sustainability Institute. And I'm delighted to welcome you here to this event. It's great to see so many students, and I know you're here voluntarily under no pressure at all. So just a word about the Sustainability Institute. UNH was far away out in front back in 1997 when we established the first university-wide sustainability institute in the country. And I had the great honor to be the founding director of that effort. And that's 21 years ago, and sustainability is now, of course, a required issue for higher education, and for good reason. But UNH in so many ways has really seen the writing on the wall and embraced the challenge. In terms of sustainability at UNH, we have worked across some key areas of climate and energy, biodiversity and ecosystems, food systems, and culture. And so in terms of tonight's program, our view of sustainability is that you can't have sustainability without sustainable food systems. And you can't have sustainable food systems without the larger conditions of sustainability. So it's complex and it's integrated, and it takes people not only from all different disciplines, but from practitioner knowledge and community knowledge and indigenous knowledge. And so it's a wonderfully complicated thing to engage in. Tonight's program is called Points of Intervention. And the key context there is that it's about taking a number of steps back from some of the more high-resolution aspects of the food system and looking at the big picture, looking at the components of the system that are everything from soil and ocean to processing, distribution, consumption, and waste. So it's a system view, system-wide view. And with that system-wide view, we can construct a shared understanding of that system as we understand it, and then identify points of intervention to try to push the system towards sustainability. Just a word of caution there, when you get inside systems, it starts to sound like it's exactly reality, but in fact, it's just a representation of a much more complex reality. So systems are a very powerful framework, but humility is always called for because reality is much more complex than the models that we can build. So with that in mind, I want to do a couple of thank yous for the co-hosts and partners. First, the UNH Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise, and Dr. Fiona Wilson will be moderating the panel in just a few minutes. They're a really dynamic and innovative operation that's a collaboration between the Paul College and the Carsey School, and as Fiona says, they are all about getting students out of the classroom and into the world to really put their knowledge to work to make a difference, and engaging and connecting students with mission-driven organizations to tackle very serious challenges. So it's a great program and great to work with you, Fiona. Also, the Post-Landfill Action Network Plan. Alex Freed is in the back working, as he always is. And has just completed a great day-long fair with his colleagues, which we understand had a great turnout. And so PLAN, the Post-Landfill Action Network, was started by Alex, who's an alum of UNH in 2013, and really took innovations that he and his fellow students developed here and now have taken it out across the country with a social enterprise that has 9 full-time employees and is working with over 200 campuses, and including UNH, so we're happy to be partnering with PLAN as well. We also want to thank co-sponsors of the event here from UNH, the Carsey School of Public Policy, UNH Cooperative Extension, the dual major in eco-gastronomy, UNH Health and Wellness, the New Hampshire Ag Experiment Station and College of Life Science and Agriculture, the Office of Community Equity and Diversity, and the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs. So it's, again, it's a collaborative undertaking from start to finish. So let me just briefly introduce our keynote speaker, Jabari Paul. He is the Assistant U.S. Activism Manager at Ben & Jerry's. We're really delighted to have Jabari here to give this keynote, representing a corporation that's long been associated with commitments to environmental justice and to social and environmental issues. And these days, that's a claim that's being tested more and more as the bar is getting raised for greater accountability, greater transparency. And so it's a chance for all of us to get very well-grounded in the efforts of a large corporation to really bring into balance this idea of the profit motive and these values of social and environmental concern, because we understand that for-profit businesses and corporations in particular are powerful forces in the food system, and they can either help push that system towards sustainability, or they could create tremendous obstacles to that. So understanding their view of the food system is really important, so we're looking forward to that. Just a few things about Jabari. He's just done a lot of stuff related to social justice in his work life. He recently worked as a program director for 50+1 Strategies, a political consulting firm, where he led coalition building efforts to identify and support solutions that help Black, Hispanic, low-income, and other underrepresented students in school and beyond. He has a long track record of providing volunteer leadership to support social justice work. He's held several leadership positions in the NAACP, including serving as a member of the National Board of Directors for 4 years. He is a graduate of Florida A&M University and Northwestern University. So, Jabari, welcome. Oh, there you are.
Thank you, Tom. When most people think of Ben & Jerry's, they probably just think of us as an ice cream company. But just like any of our delicious pint-sized products, Cherry Garcia, Chunky Monkey, chocolate chip cookie dough, if you could look beneath our cap and dig in, what you will find is that there's more to us than meets the eye. Yes, we like to make great ice cream, the world's best in my opinion, call me biased, but we're also serious about positive social change in the world, and we are committed also to food justice. Over the next few minutes, I will talk to you about what food justice means to our company and how we have pursued it. But to understand what food justice means to us, first you must understand our story. The values-driven company that we are today almost never was. The year was 1981. It was the beginning of a new era in politics, space exploration, and pop culture. Ronald Reagan was sworn in as the President of the United States. Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed as the first female to the United States Supreme Court. NASA launched the space shuttle program Columbia. Cable TV gave us MTV. And the UK gave us a new royal couple, Prince Charles and Princess Diana. I couldn't leave the royals out of this speech. 1981 also marked the beginning of a new era for our company because it was the year that the dynamic duo, our co-founders, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield, parted ways with each other. The company was then 3 years old, and like most startups, it went through its growing pains. To make a long story short, Jerry decided to leave the company, and Ben thought about selling it after Jerry left. That was until he got advice from a restaurateur who he had encountered. Jerry complained that he wanted to get out of business because he didn't like the way that businesses operated. The restaurateur retorted, "If there's something that you don't like about business, why don't you just change it?" This was a eureka moment for Ben, and it was the point at which there was a paradigm shift in the company. Ben and Jerry joined a then budding socially responsible business movement that focused on operating in a way to add value to society without compromising the well-being of future generations. In the years that followed, Jerry returned to the company. Yay. The company, it crystallized its values, goals, and mission. We became more profitable and expanded our operations. And in 2000, Ben & Jerry's was bought by Unilever. However, before the company was sold, its leaders fought hard to make sure that the social mission of the company would be protected. That's why, to this day, Ben & Jerry's is the only Unilever subsidiary that has an independent board of directors that is chiefly responsible for protecting the social mission of the organization, for making sure that it remains one of the pillars of our mission statement. So what is the social missions of Ben & Jerry? The social mission of Ben & Jerry's is to use our company in innovative ways to make the world a better place. This is one part of our company's three-part mission statement. We also have a product and an economic mission. Our product mission, made simply, is to make fantastic ice cream. And our economic mission is to maintain sustainable financial growth. We view success as each of these parts, our social, product, and economic missions, working in harmony with each other. Company success is seen and measured as a balance among and between our social, product, and economic missions. Also notice that when we present our mission statement, we present each of these three parts side by side. To us, that symbolizes that one mission is no more important than the other. This makes up a system that we call linked prosperity. Linked prosperity refers to the idea that when the company prospers, when the company benefits, that everything it touches should also benefit, including employees, suppliers, customers, communities, and the environment. The notion of linked prosperity in our mission is what drives us to support and engage in social justice advocacy as a company. Currently, our advocacy focuses on addressing racial, economic, and environmental justice issues and the intersection between them. Hence, this is why food justice matters to us, because it's the perfect example of an intersectional issue. The food justice movement is a branch of the larger food movement that is broadly pro-sustainable agricultural and anti-industrial agriculture or monoculture. The food justice movement calls attention to the irrefutable impact that race and class has on the food system from production to consumption. It seeks to empower poor, underserved, and marginalized populations throughout each stage of the food system process. This can mean anything from governments providing public lands or funding resources for community gardens in low-income communities and communities of color, to companies creating economic opportunities in these communities by sourcing raw materials from law farms. The latter is the greatest way in which Ben & Jerry's contributes to the food justice movement. Both our dairy and non-dairy supply chains include small or family-owned farms. When companies conduct business with small farms, it not only helps to boost local economies, but it also ensures equity in food production. It gives small farmers a leg up to compete against industrial agriculture that is good at food standardization because of the cultivation of a single crop in a given area. However, big ag is overwhelmingly bad at environmental sustainability and creating a sense of community in the way that small farms do when they participate in cooperatives or events like farmers markets. With regard to environmental sustainability, small farms have a better track record, but they can be bad at it too. That's why our company pays farms extra on top of the costs we pay them for raw materials if they meet certain environmental standards of ours. We do this as a part of an incentive program for farmers in our dairy supply chain that we call Caring Dairy. And these slides are about our Caring Dairy program. We not only require them to meet certain environmental standards, but we also require them to meet other standards within our company. And these are the different levels. So basically, through our Caring Dairy program, how it works is that if you achieve a certain success level, you get paid a certain portion among the cost of raw materials. The next level up even more, the next level up even more. And what we are now in the process of moving toward so that this program won't just be based upon our own internal metrics is third-party validators. An added benefit of working with small farms that I'm sure will matter to many of you is that it may help to reduce food waste. A British magazine called Farmers Weekly recently published an article that cites a worldwide fund case study on this issue. The article suggests that small farms may be a part of the solution to food waste because industrial farms waste a lot more food during the post-harvest or storage phase of food production. According to the World Wildlife Fund case study, for every 100 grams of spinach that is grown on farms in South Africa, only 26 grams are consumed. This is a problem that we have to correct and we can correct. We must stop food waste. Discarded food is one of the biggest single components of U.S. landfills and incinerators, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. According to a 2016 report published by The Guardian, in the United States, some 60 million tons or $160 billion worth of produce is thrown away annually. This undoubtedly contributes to food insecurity in U.S. communities and abroad. I am here today because Ben & Jerry's believes that businesses have a responsibility to help communities. We recognize businesses have the ability to be powerful forces for social change. The problem that is created by food waste, food insecurity, is of equal concern to our company, especially now. Since last year, Ben & Jerry's has been engaged in supporting the New Poor People's Campaign that is a revival of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign that was started and led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. until the time of his assassination, which took place 50 years ago. Similar to the 1968 campaign, the New Poor People's Campaign strives to unite people across the country to address racism, poverty, militarism, and ecological devastation is the newest add-on of the New Poor People's Campaign. I believe that food insecurity may partly be responsible for Dr. King starting the 1968 campaign and therefore responsible for inspiring the New Poor People's Campaign because of a well-accounted story of a trip he made to Marks, Mississippi in 1966. Dr. King had visited the Black sharecropping community to preach at a funeral of a friend. And he was accompanied by an ally of his, Dr. Ralph Abernathy. And in his autobiography, Dr. Abernathy wrote about an experience that he and Dr. King had while visiting a school. These are his words. "We looked around the primitive schoolhouse and saw them watching us, wide-eyed and silent, having been told who we were. They seemed bright and alert, but something bothered me about them. Then I realized what it was. Virtually all of them were underweight, a condition that lent a special poignancy to their enormous eyes. After watching a teacher divide a single apple into quarters for 4 hungry children at lunchtime, Dr. King uncharacteristically broke down in tears and had to leave the room. Later, he said to Dr. Abernathy, 'I can't get those children out of my mind. We can't let this kind of poverty exist in our country. I don't think people really know that little school children are slowly starving in the United States of America. I didn't know.' Making this poverty visible to the whole nation became the goal of the Poor People's Campaign. Ben & Jerry's is proud to join the leadership of the new Poor People's Campaign in hopes of finishing what Dr. King started and fight food insecurity. What I have shared with you today only scratches the surface of the mission of our social mission. I was going to say something about ice cream, but I don't see anyone eating ice cream. Have you received the Ben & Jerry's ice cream yet? We have to make sure you receive the Ben & Jerry's ice cream by the time that you leave. I was banking on that to get even more applause at the end. We'll make sure you get that ice cream. But basically, I hope that what I have shared with you today inspires you to learn more about Ben & Jerry's and the work that we're doing. Please follow us online and also on our social media about the latest updates with our activism work. Thank you very much for listening today, and a special thanks to Dr. Fiona Wilson and Alex Fareed for extending me this invitation to speak. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much, Jabari. I've long been a fan of Ben & Jerry's, and I thought I knew a lot about the company, but I learned a lot more tonight. So congratulations on the really important work that Ben & Jerry's has done for decades, but is now entering into a whole new phase of their impact. So thanks so much for opening our event tonight. And I'm looking in the back. We have Ben & Jerry's ice cream coming at the end, right, guys? Yes, it's coming. There'll be ice cream at the end, so stick around. All right, well, we wanted to have Jabari open this event, but we're now going to transition into the panel portion of the event. So I'm going to ask our panelists to come up and take a seat in a chair up here. So as they come up, I will introduce them to you. So as Tom said in the beginning, we wanted to make this panel reflective of the theme of this event and Plan's national tour, which is points of intervention. So we wanted to pick panelists that represent different points on this sort of linear economy in the food system, everything from how our food is grown to how it is processed and distributed, to how it is consumed, and by whom it is consumed, and then also how it is, how food is wasted. So we've got some wonderful panelists joining us tonight. I will just note at the beginning that unfortunately one of our panelists, Rahim Baraka from Baraka Community Wellness, who does amazing work around health and food access down in Boston, unfortunately got food poisoning, some irony in that. So we wish him well, and so sorry he can't be with us tonight. But we're also joining Jabari tonight are also 2 other panelists. So on Jabari's left is David Herring, David is the Executive Director of Wolfneck Center for Agriculture and the Environment. He's going to be telling you a lot more about what Wolfneck does, so I won't steal his thunder. But Dave has been in the leadership and management of nonprofit organizations for nearly 20 years. He became Executive Director of Wolfneck back in 2012. And since then, he has really led an amazing transformation of that organization. And I say it with a note of pride because I'm also on the board of directors of Wolfneck Center. And then prior to joining Wolfneck Center, Dave was also the first executive director for a wonderful organization called Maine Hudson Trails. And then had a number of roles prior to that. He grew up in Michigan, but has been here in the Northeast since 1999 and lives with his family in the woods of Falmouth, Maine. So Dave, thanks so much for being here tonight. We're really happy to have you. We also have, to Dave's left, is Karen Spiller. And Karen is the very newly appointed Thomas W. Huss Professor of Sustainable Food Systems here at UNH. Congratulations, Karen, and welcome to the team. She's also the principal of CAS Consulting, and she provides mission-based consulting with really a focus on helping organizations do strategic planning and other kinds of development activities, particularly around health and equity. She has a lot of experience working with youth, young adults, and community members in a variety of educational and training programs. She serves on national and regional committees and really has spent her whole career committed to creating equitable public health and equitable sustainable food systems. I'm going to let Karen tell you a little bit more about what her work is, both with CAS Consulting, but also with Food Solutions New England, of which she is an integral part. So thank you, all three of you, for being here. I'm going to come over and join you over there. But what we're going to do, just so you know, before the ice cream, is that I've asked each of our two new panelists to add on a little bit to what Jabari has said and give you a sense of what is the organization that they're involved in? What does it do? And more specifically, how is that organization working to help create a more sustainable food system? I'm going to start with Karen, because Karen is, as I said, an integral part of Food Solutions New England, an initiative here from the UNH Sustainability Institute. And so I'm going to ask Karen to start us off, give us a little bit more of a context about why do we care about creating a sustainable food system? What's wrong with the food system we have today? What are the issues? What are the problems with it? What do we even mean by a sustainable food system? And also, how is Food Solutions New England working to try and create that? So, Karen, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, that would be great. It should be on.
Hello?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Oh, gee, you're giving me this opportunity, and I don't know where to start or where I can stop. But I first want to say thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening. It is a very challenging time for all of us, but a time for opportunity. So we're thinking about sustainable food systems. It's something that is going to be here beyond our lifetime. So whatever's happening now, we expect it to be there, healthy, feeding people, feeding every person, and supporting people in a variety of different ways. We look at a food system as one that we're talking about intervention, but those interventions are intersectionality. It is also interdependence. So we think about a food system, it has so many different sectors that have to be lifted up. And as Jabari was talking about in terms of business, business has people who are part of that business, but they also have, when we talk about the dairy farms, they're the farmers, and then they're the farm workers. And then, of course, it comes all the way back down to us as eaters. So we think about the food system has multiple points of intersection and intervention that we always have to hold up for it to be sustainable. So when we talk about sustainability at Food Solutions New England, we're talking about a few more steps further. Sustainability means just. Sustainability means that people are seeing themselves in this, They are seeing an opportunity for economic stability, for health, for wealth building. There's so many pieces when you think about sustainable. So it's not just a business being viable in terms of the amount of money it has in its IRA and in its how much the wealth is in that company, but it's also how is it, as Jabari is talking, accountable to the people, accountable to the citizens who are taking part of that product, who are putting into that product, and the exchange of, one of my friends used to talk about fair exchange is no robbery, that in that sustainable food system, everyone's needs are met, lifted up as our total goal in that. It's not one group of people benefit and the others are left behind, but it is looking at every point of intersection and intervention in such a way that we are lifting up and paying attention to the thriving communities, the individuals, the companies, the participants in every point of that. We talked about it earlier about continuum of a food system. So are you all familiar with Food Solutions New England? Okay, good.
Maybe show of hands.
Show of hands. All right. You gotta learn more about it. This is an amazing, amazing resource, tool, ally. It is something that is standing up and being recognized across the country for what it is doing around food systems, transformation. And it's right here in your own backyards. So I know that we were talking earlier, yesterday, about I was learning about the different departments that are here at UNH, but there's a Sustainability Institute. And this organization it's probably, I know my involvement has been 6 or 7 years, but long before I was even thinking about it, they had been thinking and using their resources to think about how do we really sustain, how do we really build a sustainable, equitable food system? And one of the things that Tom Kelly, the executive director, and his team thought about is that we really need to start with our regional approach. So New England, our 6 New England states, the power in that, of the intersectionality of that, and bringing that group of representatives, again, we're talking about the intersection of the different sectors that are in a food system. So you have those who are really the scientists and working on better soil health. We have the nutritionist who's thinking about the food after it's grown. We have the seed and soil specialists. We have the people thinking about law and conservation. We're thinking about, oh gosh, any role you can think about is in our food system. And what Tom and his team thought about is we need to find a way to bring those people together, and in that way created a network. So the Sustainability Institute is the convener of a network of regional advocates, people that are extremely passionate about the way our food system currently is not feeding us all and not equitable, and creating a way, an opportunity for us to create strategies, build power and will about changing that. And with that, understanding also, I think one of the other wonderful contributions, one of the initial contributions, is realizing that when you have shared values, you want a way of communicating it. So that's why I have in my lap a New England food vision. This is a 44-page document. I always talk about it that way. But it also looks at a food system from the historical way we have our land, how we use our land, to how we can think about using it differently, from production to processing, from, yes, nutrition, of our farm and fish. So when we think about our food system, it's not just our land, but it's our sea. We are really, really fortunate here in New England to have so much sea, so much water, being stewards of the land and stewards of the sea, stewards of water. and really making decisions. And when we talk about sustainability, we as eaters have to make decisions about making more choices that are locally based. So regionality, regionally based. So this vision was a way for us to think about how we could move towards a transformed food system in all those sectors I was talking about. And it was an aspiration. So what was beautiful about this is the authors were not coming out with a prescribed way of doing it, because we also know that 6 different states have different processes and different programs and different resources, and so they're going to do it differently. But there is something about the regionality that allows us to build on the best practices, the best selves, the best in those different states, to be able to create a food system from all of our passion and knowledge that will feed us all, and equitably, with racial equity at the core. So we have a food system that is not feeding us all, and there are those who are in and those who are out. There we talk about the fair for the fisherman, fair for the farmer, and fair for the eaters. But we have to think, when fair is equity. And fair, if you start with equity at the core, then you start making different decisions. And just what Jabari was talking about, you make different business decisions. You make different decisions about who is employed, where you buy your seeds. The list is long, but it is a way of thinking that transforms you as a participant, but not only that, but again, we're talking about transforming the food system, which starts in little ways, little ripples, and becomes a big wave.
Thank you, Karen. A big wave. We love that. Yeah, exactly. So, and of course, part of a sustainable food system is also how the food is grown and the impact on the land and the natural systems, as well as the human and economic systems, of course. And so we're going to transition now to Dave, who's going to talk a little bit more about that from the agricultural perspective, how the food is grown and how we impact the land and how we work with farmers. So tell us a little bit more about what Wolf's Neck's Center for Agriculture and the Environment does, Dave.
Sure. Is this working? Hello, can you hear me? How about now? Yeah. Much better. Perfect. Well, thank you, Fiona, Dr. Fiona Wilson, and Tom Kelly and others for having me here and giving me an opportunity to speak with the group here. We have a lot of connection with UNH over at Wolf's Neck. Wolf's Neck is located in Freeport, Maine, not far from here, and we have a couple of folks who I was actually in meetings with today. A gentleman named Tom Prohl, who's our production educator. Raise your hand if you know Tomato Tom. Anybody? One over there, okay. I thought, he tells me that he's famous over here, but I guess it's been a few years since he was here. How about another name? How about Dorn Cox? Anybody here know who Dorn Cox is? Okay, well, so I'm not surprised. So a couple things. I'm going to bounce around a little bit here because that's what I like to do. First, Karen, it's fascinating to follow you and also to meet you, because this 44-page document, the New England Food Vision, sits on your lap, but it has sat on my desk since its initial issue in 2012, I think it was, which was the year that I took over the helm at Wolf's Neck. And I have to be honest with you, it's kind of funny that I took that job, or that they even hired me, because at the time, I didn't really know much about farming. I grew up in suburban Michigan and wasn't really connected to the food system or to food, and yet I had kind of built a career in the nonprofit sector of trying to help organizations find their purpose. Like, how do we change the world? And like Jabari was saying with Ben and Jerry's, the nonprofit sector is set up to change the world, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. So when I took the role at Wolf's Neck, it was about, okay, how can I help this organization change the world? And the first thing I had to do was kind of get grounded in the other work that's being done out there around a sustainable food system. And one of the first things I came across was the New England Food Vision. And in it, I started to learn more about the challenges facing food production. So where's our food coming from? Who's producing it? and learning about these dramatic shifting paradigms around the fact that people aren't necessarily growing up on farms and taking over their father or grandfather's farm in the way that they once did. Oftentimes, those kids have seen the life that their parents and grandparents lived, and they wanted something different, so they've moved away. And the places that our food is coming from are less and less within the communities that we come from, more and more from far away places, and more in fewer and larger. So I'm going to throw out a couple of stats here for you. In Maine, because that's where we're based, as a 626-acre coastal farm, in the 1960s, there was 4,000 some odd dairy farms in Maine. In 1980, there was 2,000 some odd dairy farms in Maine. Today, there are about 250 dairy farms in Maine. Now, obviously, that's a dramatic decline, and you might be thinking, wow, so Maine doesn't produce that much milk. Well, Maine actually produces about the same amount of milk that we did in 1980. Only it comes from about 20% or less of those farms. So what that means is, instead of in a rural community having maybe 8 dairy farms in one community, maybe you have 1, or maybe you don't have any. And that's a real issue that's creating issues that are both environmental and social and economic. Because in an industry like dairy and the agricultural economy in general, there's strength in numbers. If a company like Stonyfield that we partner with, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, we ship our milk to them, but if they don't have enough farms along a supply route, they're not going to come to your farm. And so when we were thinking about how can we play a difference at Wolf's Neck, we looked at the organic dairy sector and learned a lot about it through our friends at Stonyfield. And in 2015, we launched the Organic Dairy Farmer Training Program at Wolf's Neck, which was, at the time, kind of a first of its kind residential organic dairy farmer training program, where we have apprentices living and working at the farm for 2 years as part of a residential program that's partnered with the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship out of Wisconsin. So apprentices will live and work at the farm for about 3,000 hours, or about 3,800 hours, I should say, and they have 300 hours of class time, and it's a guided pathway to farm ownership. Why is this important? It's important because farmers aren't coming from farms that they grew up on. We as a nonprofit have to think about, well, where is our food going to come from, and how do we want it produced? So that kind of brings me to my next piece. As a nonprofit working farm and educational center that like Wolf's Neck is, we're oftentimes kind of approaching things from a lens of what can we learn here that can benefit the world. So we pride ourselves in being a place-based organization with an impact that stretches far beyond the boundaries of our property. And so one of the major initiatives that we're working on right now, and I mentioned Dorn because Dorn is behind this initiative, as well as other folks at Stonyfield and other partners that we're developing around the country, around regenerative agriculture and quantifying the outcomes that on-farm outcomes through a variety of systems. So we're trying to develop new systems and new tools and new measurements so that we can help farms understand the impact that they're having on the land and on the ecosystem. Because when you think about our food system now, especially the industrialized food system, it's largely about profit. But the hidden cost of food is really kind of the underlying dark story within our food system, because the hidden cost of food is seen on our healthcare bills. And it's seen in the fact that for the last 2 years, the average age or the life expectancy has leveled off and actually declined. So for the first time in the last 50 years, 2 years in a row, humans are expected to live shorter lives. And so when you think about why is that, a big part of that is connected to the issues that we're talking about today around food, both food insecurity, both the environmental effects of food, and food justice. Because it's interesting, my guess is that if Dr. Martin Luther King were alive today, these students that he saw in that classroom might have looked different. How do you think that they might have looked different? They'd be obese. And that's the new look of food insecurity, because the food that people who don't have means have access to is not healthy food. And so when you think about the issues that we face here in New England, but also nationally and internationally, they all have roots back to food, and have roots back to food justice, and have roots back to food insecurity and food production. And so as an organization that is a working farm but also an education center with 30,000 some odd visitors every year, we have a really unique opportunity and platform to find ways to connect people to their food, both when they're on their visit to Wolf's Neck, but also when they return home, and help them understand how to make more informed food choices, how to compost, how to understand the effects of food waste. All of those sorts of things are all connected. So I'm pleased to be here with you tonight, and hopefully we'll get your brains thinking a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. So now you know a little bit more about these three organizations. We want to transition, before we'll open up in a little bit for Q&A and dialogue with the audience. So be thinking about the questions that you'd like to ask any of our panelists or all of our panelists. But we wanted just to do something. Everything we're hearing, I hope, makes a lot of sense to you all, right, about how we create a more sustainable food system. Yet it's not that simple, right? There are still some really big, I like to call them the elephants in the room, right? There are some really big issues that sometimes we talk about and sometimes we don't talk about, but there's definitely thorny issues, big, hairy challenges. Some people call them the grand challenges, right, that we have to solve if we really are going to get to this end that we're all looking for, which is a more sustainable and equitable food system. So I'm going to pose a different question to each of our panelists that get at some of those big elephants in the room. So I'm going to start with Jabari, who has a working microphone, I think. Good. All right.
I think so.
So Jabari, I mean, as I said at the beginning, Ben & Jerry's is one of my all-time, favorite companies. I admire this company so much. It's sort of an iconic company. It's revered as one of the more sustainable companies in America. It really paved the way for other sustainable businesses to follow. And your parent company, Unilever, is also, although it's a big global corporation, it's also one of the companies that's really reforming capitalism, a more socially conscious and environmentally conscious form of capitalism. So you're one of the good companies, right? But starting in 2015, Ben & Jerry's was the subject of protest by migrant workers and the organization Migrant Justice. They were demanding better working conditions for dairy farmers and dairy workers in your supply chain. And, you're an amazing company, and it took almost 2 years for Ben & Jerry's to sort of really respond to those criticisms and to really make some changes in the company. Can you just help us understand, why does it take so long for a big company to make those kinds of changes, even when you have protesters on your doorstep?
Well, first, Ben & Jerry's recognizes that we are not a perfect company. We strive to be, but we recognize that there's work that we have to do. When it comes to that particular situation, one of the things that frustrates us internally, just to be very transparent here, is that we were actually working on the problem all along while protests were going on. There had always been an ongoing conversation around, how to create better situations on the farms within our supply chain for the migrant workers. One of the things that speaks to that was the Karen Dairy slide that I had put up that showed all of the measures that we ask for farms within our supply chains to rise to in order to be able to benefit from the program. I think to answer your question, the reason why oftentimes it's a very incremental, slow rolling process is because it's finding the perfect balance between all of the things that you're trying to do. So take for instance, the Care and Dairy program works with the farmers themselves and trying to make sure that they have sustainable models on their farm, right? But now when the migrant workers spoke up and they were like, hey, we need better pay, we need better treatment on the farms, that is when the Milk with Dignity program came out. But mind you, that program had never been formed before that situation happened. Milk with Dignity was actually a program put in place in 2015. So the important thing to hear there is that we had been trying to work towards an agreement that both the farmers could live with and the workers could live with ever since 2015. The end result just didn't come until recently. So, it's kind of, when you have multiple stakeholders, it's always difficult to come to a place of solution that satisfies everybody around the table. But we recognize again that we're not a perfect company, but we strive to look at how we can improve our processes every day.
Yeah, thank you for being so open about that. I think it's something that everyone struggles with. And just one thing I wanted to mention is that it is hard to know, like, who are the better companies, who are the good companies, right? And Ben & Jerry's is a certified B Corporation. How many of you know about B Corporations? Just a few of you. So like Karen said, more of you need to know about B Corporations. And so B Corporations, and we've got a couple of other B Corporations in the room tonight, including our friends at Stonyfield, which are also a certified B Corporation, and a number of other, Pete & Jerry's, the egg company is a certified B Corporation there. They're just the ones in the food system. But there are over 2,500 B Corps now around the world in about 50 different industries. And it is a third-party certification that really looks at the whole entirety of a company. It looks at all of its practices, its environmental practices, it's how it treats its employees, how it treats the people in its supply chain, how it interacts with the community, how the organization is governed. And so it's really a way of understanding, who are the good companies. And so I encourage you all to really think about, as consumers, figuring out who are the companies you want to buy from, right? Ben & Jerry's isn't perfect, as Jabari said, but they are one of the companies that is really trying to continuously improve their practices to be good for people and planet as well as profit. So thanks for the work you're doing. Dave, here's a tough question for you. So you actually mentioned kind of, massive food insecurity, that, people don't have enough food or the right kind of food. Yeah, I know a few years ago, Wolf Next Center decided to sort of go all in and become 100% certified organic farm. And it's something that's really important to the mission and the directors of that organization. Yet many people while they understand some of the benefits of organic farming, there's some criticism that how can we possibly ever farm organically and still feed, 6 billion people in the world? What's your response to that?
We have to go beyond organic. Honestly, I think it's about regenerative. And one of the things I mentioned in my opening remarks was that the true cost of food plays out in the other aspects of our lives that we don't necessarily anticipate. So we kind of, as consumers, have largely been tricked into thinking that food should be really cheap. So if you go into the grocery store and you buy it, you look to get your chicken breasts and it's more than $1.29 a pound, it's like, man, this food is so expensive. It's not. It's so cheap. And the cost that's hidden behind that is that the farmer who produced that likely didn't meet their cost of production. It means that the ecosystem that food was produced in and the environment it was produced in likely has long-term lasting impacts associated with likely a confined system. And it means that the food itself is likely not as healthy. And so when you think about the food system, it's such a complicated web, and sometimes I think it's taken 50 years or more for it to become broken. So if you think about a pre-industrialized food system, it wasn't necessarily so broken in 1940. Were there issues? Definitely. But what has happened in the second half of the 20th century and to some degree the first part of the 21st century here is kind of its period of breaking, I guess, if you will. And there have been kind of some businesses and nonprofits and individuals who are looking to intervene at points along the way. But it's going to take, it's going to take all of us to change all of these systems, because it's not just about our food. But food can make us healthy. It can also producing food can also be a profitable business. And that's part of the reason that we at Wolf's Neck are training organic dairy farmers, because when we looked at the opportunity that organic dairy farmers had to make a viable existence as farmers, we felt that it was A, most in line with our values, but B, it was the greatest opportunity for them to run a viable business, because there are systems in place that help an organic dairy farmer get a higher pay price for their milk. And it's really encouraging to learn more about the things that Ben & Jerry's does for their farmers, because even though Ben & Jerry's isn't organic, it sounds like there are bonuses as part of the Caring Dairy program for their farmers when they meet certain requirements. And when you look at the list of requirements that are up there, it's actually kind of beyond organic. A number of them are associated with the same kinds of metrics that organic farmers are held to, but there are others as well. So it's really encouraging to see, Jabari. And for us at Wolf's Neck, it has been a little bit of an uphill challenge when people say, well, you're creating healthy food for the wealthy. It's interesting. We're actually thinking more about the farmer. We're trying to figure out ways for farmers to help become a better, small farmers especially, become a viable part of the future of our food system, so that all of our milk isn't coming from 10,000 cow dairies in California and Colorado, but from 75 cow dairies in Lee or in Lewiston, Maine. And so we're hopeful that we're going to be part of that transformation.
Thanks, Dave. Karen or Jabari, do you want to add anything to what Dave said? Because Dave touched on a lot of really important topics, and I'm just wondering if any of you want to comment before we move on.
I just wanted to speak a little bit towards the cheap food and the cost of food. And I think we have to also think about food is medicine. We talk about health, as Dave said. We talk about food as a human right. And we talk about food with dignity. So when we're thinking about, and I always think about, it's important to know where your food comes from. And when we put a value of human on where our food comes from, and it's not going to the grocery store and buying Cabot milk and saying, oh, it's too much. It's really looking, well, how did this get into this carton? And the dairy farmers in Vermont are the ones who provided the milk for that product. So thinking about that, I always have a conversation, and also in my making the connection to regional, to local, to backyard, is that as a urban gardener or window box, you are thinking about, maybe January, about what you were going to plant. You're thinking about, your whole list of your favorite vegetables and where are you going to put them? Where are you going to plot them? And then you can't wait till the ground gets to the point where you can actually make that landscape. Then you're out there watering it as often as you can and watching it sprout out and grow, and the fruits of your labor you harvest and you share. And you are spending time nurturing that over months. Some things grow much quicker, but some takes longer. But I always encourage people to make the connection to the farmer, because the farmer is in larger quantities thinking about, what am I going to plant? Where am I going to plant it? How am I going to make sure the soil is nutrient for us, never knowing who we're going to be? And they are taking the same commitment around tilling the soil, planting it, watering it, and harvesting, and making sure that we get the best fruits and vegetables in our farmers markets, in our grocery stores. And so the same love and care that we give to our window box and our urban garden, farmers are doing that in massive ways. So I always like to put a face to the farmer, the same for our fishermen, that once we put that human connection there, we then begin to think about there is no cheap food because of the commitment, the love, the thinking, the science that people are thinking about to make it come to our table really has to be honored and lifted up. And so I just encourage you the next time you are buying one of your grocery stores, certainly be doing regional. Check the back of your label for New England, Massachusetts, Vermont, Rhode Island, Maine, and buy that way. But as you're doing that, you also know that product is only there as a result of a farmer making that very, very long-term investment in what you see as a product. So that's why I say there's no such thing as cheap food. I so agree. Whether it's organic or otherwise, there's nothing cheap about it.
The cheap food is just a myth. We're just not paying the real cost, and someone's losing out, right? Yeah. And to your points, Karen, the farmer also has to make a viable living for himself and his family, and that's when we get cheap food. Those farmers are often not making enough money to be long-term viable. Yeah. Did you want to add anything, Jabari, to what Dave said?
Well, no, just speaking to the human element and, the size of the problem that we have to fix. Earlier when you were commenting about what would Dr. King see if he were in that classroom today, I worked for a few years lobbying for policy changes that would reduce children's obesity in the state of Florida. And there was this quote by Madeleine Albright that I used to love to use, and I'm going to mess it up, but the essence of it was basically America is one of the few countries across the globe where within one neighborhood you can see both extremes. You can see both children who, suffer because of food insecurity and food access and food deserts. And then you can also see children, in the same block who suffer from obesity. So it just lets you know, one, the complexity of the problem, as, we've been saying, but also, what needs to be fixed is a lot, Yeah.
So to that point, maybe we'll just do one last question for Karen. Karen, you talked a little bit about sort of having a food system that had racial equity at its core, and you did too, Jabari. So what's hindering us from getting to a food system that really is equitable for all? What are the barriers that we have to remove? Who do we need at the table? Why aren't we there yet? What's it going to take?
Oh,
Darn, that's a hard question.
It's a hard question. It's a challenging question. It challenges us all to be thinking and behaving differently. It challenges us all to look at our own unconscious biases that result in decisions that exclude. We have to challenge ourselves with some of the, we call those old stories that we have. That we are constantly, actually, our brain is taking all this information, and so there are things that we compartmentalize, and there are things that we categorize. And as a result of that, we immediately go to an assumption or a decision based on that small little space where we have information that is going to affirm. So we're always looking for. So if we're assuming that the brown boy with a hood on is going to rob me, every brown boy with a hood you're going to avoid and think that way. So there are also this thinking that we have that we pick up through the media, which we should know now that there's fake news. I mean, we know that, don't we? Come on. Okay, because I hope that you all are politically and socially aware that most of what you're hearing, especially in the last 4 years, is not true on so many different levels. So always challenge what you hear and what you see. So that's what we have not been doing, is not challenging our assumptions. And we're not also, I think the other piece about it, we have to spend time with people that don't look like us so that we can learn more. Because we were talking earlier about the farmer and the farmer, large-scale farmer, and the urban farmer. And there's so many commonalities in terms of values. And we don't usually take the time to find out or inquire, check in on the value that's shared, unless you come from the same city or state, you wear the same jeans, the same pants, you're in the same department. And it's really, I would challenge you to find somebody that doesn't look like you, doesn't have the same exterior as you do, and engage in a conversation about something that's important to you. And you will find that there is more in common, more shared value than you even thought of. And so I think about my college days. College is the universe of opportunity to try things on, to meet and build your network in such a way that this network can continue to sustain you when you leave. So staying in sometimes we call it boxes. Stay in your box of what's familiar and what's common and what's known will limit you in terms of making those important connections and relationships that are going to sustain you and build you to being a more, what do I want to call it, caring, giving human being. So I think that part of it is when we think about equity and racial equity it comes from fear of losing, fear of not having enough, and not recognizing that there really is enough for all. And when we start thinking and accepting that, then we are going to behave differently. And we're going to invite diversity or differences. I don't want to call it diversity, differences, as opposed to fear and avoid that.
I know that was a question for Karen. I would like to take a stab at it too.
Please, go for it.
Well, because, I believe that life is about choices, but I also believe that not everyone's condition is a result of their choices. And I think that we have to recognize that. And I think that we also have to recognize when it comes to the food system, as well as many other systems in our country, the role that systemic racism and, systemic conditions have inflicted on groups of people. And I'll give you the prime example of from the community that I'm from. So if you've detected a Southern drawl that I have,
Really?
it's because I'm from Florida. And there is the oldest African American settlement in my community is this community called Smoky Hollow, right? And Smoky Hollow now is the area where there's this neighborhood where the annual income is $12,000 annually. And you see a lot of people who suffer from conditions related to foods there, and with a lack of access to healthy foods there. But then when I learned the history of that community, I was amazed, which is that the reason that it was the first African American settlement in my community is because the soil there is the richest soil anywhere, right? And it was a prosperous community there, and it sits about 2 miles away from the capital. Well, what the government did over the years was that they used eminent domain, and they came in and they built highways all over this community, and just all of that good fertile ground that was good for growing healthy things, they just covered it up. Cement, built different buildings all over it until, it shrunk into this little tiny area that was too small to do anything with, too small to grow healthy fruits, healthy vegetables. And then they wondered why, about a decade ago, when they were talking about finding space to build a city park there, why the residents were up in arms because, they wanted to name the city park something, crazy without even paying homage to the history of that community and what had been done. So that's just a prime example that now you have a modern day community that suffers from a lot of ailments because of what goes into their body, when at one time that community had very fertile soil where, they could grow a lot of fresh produce, things that were better for themselves, but that was taken away from them by systemic racism and these institutional problems that had mounted over the years. So I think that we just have to acknowledge that when we talk about this issue too.
Yeah, it's a great example. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jabari. So talking of diversity and inclusion, we'd love to open this up and get a more diverse point of view in this conversation. So we'd love to invite people in the audience to ask any of our panelists questions. And there are some microphones at the back, I think. Microphones at the back. Yes, there are. So who would like to ask a question? I'm a professor. I can stare for a really long time until someone asks a question. All right, we've got somebody right in the front here. Emma, right down there.
Thank you all so much. I especially appreciated the observation of business as a force for good in interacting with society and the environment, and also the role of nonprofits and civil society in preparing knowledgeable business people and viable businesses. Jabari, you touched on this a little bit, but specifically, what do each of you think the role of government and public policy is in making a more just food system?
Great question.
Well, I know you asked Jabari, but people know about the Farm Bill. I think in general, government should be helping create the conditions for a society to thrive, and that can mean a number of different things depending on the issue that you're talking about. So, coming at it from the farmer perspective. Within the Farm Bill, there's a program within USDA called Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Program. So the USDA and the United States government recognizes that there's a huge issue facing the future of our food production. Where's it going to come from? And so they have allocated money within the Farm Bill to be allocated or to be awarded to organizations and institutions that are playing a role in training farmers. And so in 2016, we were awarded a multi-$100,000 grant through the BFRDP program to support the dairy grazing apprenticeship and our work to train the next generation of organic dairy farmers. So I think that, it's critical within each of these programs within our government, and I'm specific to the Farm Bill, or speaking specifically to the Farm Bill because we've received funding through that, but that funding isn't there in perpetuity, and there's a potential that it may go away in this next iteration of the Farm Bill. There's a real concern that funding for BFRDP might not be there. So we've been working with other nonprofit partners in Maine and elsewhere to advocate on behalf of that program and espouse its benefits both to us organizationally, but much more importantly to society, and helping identify what these issues are, and seeing if there's a way for the federal government to support that work.
So what Dave said was that it's advocates, that we, people, have to inform the policymakers and government, because they're there and they have not a clue about what they're voting on, whether they're proposing, and how it has implications and impacts in lots of different places. So organizations and partners like Dave are the ones informing and advocating for the most equitable, sustainable way of doing the work. So I always like to encourage us to, we talk about being citizens, and so we can be food citizens in terms of recognizing where we have our power in terms of democratic power empowerment and paying attention to organizations like his. And the Farm Bill, there's so many interventions there, finding organizations that are advocating for or working on and participating. We get a lot. I don't know if you get those sign-ons. They're always an opportunity for you to sign a petition, offer, sign this to encourage your senator, your representative. I mean, I think we don't collectively take as much action in that way that we can, in terms of knowing who that person is, what particular committee they're leading, and really being the eyes and ears, and it's almost, I say, feeding them with information that's really connected to our health and wellness.
And just a great example of that, right here from a few years ago, that there was legislation in New Hampshire that was different from the more progressive legislation in surrounding states around food composting. And it was really a barrier to New Hampshire being more sustainable in terms of how they dealt with food waste. And so a group of students right here from UNH got together with a couple of faculty members, and they went up to Concord and they managed to get the law changed, right? So I think it's a really powerful example of how students can engage in really important public policy issues related to the food system and really make change happen, right? When we're lucky we live in a state where citizens can do that. We're a small enough state you can get access to the elected officials and you can actually make change. Were you going to say something about policy, Jabari?
Well, no, I was just going to add that on the website of the National Conference of State Legislators, one of the things that I was surprised to find is they actually have a whole page on how to go about advocating for public policy change when it comes to environmental sustainability. So that's another resource, and just in terms of, looking at what might be different approaches, because the entire page just outlines a number of approaches that you can take.
Great, thank you. Question right in the back, thank you.
Hi, so I think we all know here that corn isn't the most sustainable thing that we can grow on the earth. And I'm just wondering, how can we as consumers advocate for different crops being grown when we can't necessarily afford, as college students, something else?
Thorny question. Who's up for it?
I spoke last.
Well, that's a good question. I think that the way that I would approach that question is that a lot of the corn that's raised in our country isn't necessarily raised for us specifically, but it's raised for the animals and the animal byproducts that we eat. And the same goes for soy and wheat in large part. And but when I'm making my food choices and when we develop curriculum for people coming through programs at Wolf's Neck, one of the things that we try and build awareness for is how was your food raised? And a pasture-based system, a system where animals are raised on pasture, eating crops that are grown for them, forages that are grown for them, that oftentimes are not corn, is a more sustainable approach, and as opposed to a diet that is more focused on animals or animal byproducts that are fed largely a corn-fed diet. So that's one way of answering that question, but there's a number of different ways that you could answer that.
I mean, I would also just add, right, and I'm just going to channel our good friends Alex Freed from the Post Landfill Action Network, wherever he is. The reality is that most estimates say that about 40% of food is wasted, right? I'm not saying that you waste food, but as a society, we waste a lot of food. And so one of the things I often say is, figure out ways to waste less and therefore buy less, right? And so you can use your budget to go further. Think about, it's like what your granny taught you, right? You sort of make stuff and you freeze it and you save it and you use as much of it as possible. Find ways to use the broccoli stems, not just the broccoli grounds, right? There's a lot we can do, I think. We can all do. If we waste less food, it'll make our budget, no matter how much money we have, go further. Yeah. Other questions? We've got maybe over there. Thanks, Emma. Yeah.
So as college students of UNH, how would you recommend for us to improve our sustainability here at UNH and in the city of Durham?
The question is, how do UNH students help improve food sustainability here on campus and here in Durham?
Awareness and encouraging awareness through your institution. I think clearly UNH is an institution that's committed to sustainability, and I'm sure that carries through to the food that is made available to you here on campus, but I'm sure it's not perfect. And I think becoming aware and encouraging awareness is such a huge key to understanding the power of our food choices. And so you can only choose from what's made available to you here on campus or what you can access locally. And so one of the things that you can do is help your institution become more aware of their food sourcing choices to the extent that you can, and ask those hard questions. Ask the questions: where is this turkey breast coming from? Where are we sourcing this? What percentage of our food is sourced locally? These are important questions that it's your responsibility as good food citizens to ask that of your institution. And my guess is you're going to like most of the answers, but you might not like all of them. But it's the act of asking that question that will challenge your institution to try and strive to do better.
Do you have a council or organization that convenes around food on campus? Is that yes? And so that is a good vehicle for advocating for. So are you connected? Does she know you? Oh, okay. So maybe you're saying that you're not having as much success in your request.
There's a lot of different separate organizations at UNH.
Wait for the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a lot of different separate organizations at UNH that tackles specific individual issues that kind of all work together within the MUB to create a more sustainable UNH and to make like the people who are in charge of those like specific departments in the university more aware of what's going on. For example, like the composting initiative that started here at UNH and the food waste. We do a food waste study now in the dining hall once a month to like cut down on a lot of our issues that we've been having.
So it's student advocacy.
Yeah, those are just a few examples.
Community
Yes.
advocacy. And so what was I thinking also about, do you have an opportunity of making recommendations for foods that are available to you through the food service?
I'm not
Does anybody?
specifically aware of those. I'm assuming we do because that's how the local dining initiative kind of came into effect, was from students voicing their opinion about like the dining hall food and where it was coming from. But I'm not specifically sure.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But no, but what you're doing is demonstrating that there are some student-led organizations, you did right, student-led organizations that are either in place or can be created to respond to the needs that you have. I mean, the university is to serve you. And not only, education, but good food and safety and housing and all of that. So when you're thinking about yourself as you're investing in this university as well, that you should be, we call it making them accountable, but it's also making sure that they know what your needs are so they can serve you. And so if it's something that you are not happy with, bring it forward, petition, advocate for it, because I know that the intent in any institution, large or small, is to increase the capacity for you all to be good citizens, food citizens, wherever you decide to land, being able to contribute totally to a healthy, wealthy community. So I would just encourage you to identify what those needs are, look for, there must be some kind of directory existing, and if what your need is not listed there, then start one.
Yeah, so we're sort of out of time,
Oh,
but
okay.
Dave is saying be educated, know where your food comes from, right? Karen is saying be an advocate. What would your closing 1 or 2 words be, Jabari?
No, I was just going to answer the last part because she also talked about taking it to Durham. And I would say, creating a space for forums like this. Because the type of silozation that you described in talking about the different student organizations is the same type of silozation that we see in community. And a lot of times, the reason why we don't make progress as a community working towards any issue is because we often are stuck in our silos. And the greatest way to kind of come out of those silos is by creating spaces like this. And, to the person who asked the question, how can you take this type of sustainability out into Durham? They joke with me at Ben & Jerry's because they say, now you have been corporatized. You have gone to the dark side. I'm a community advocate at heart. And I would tell you, back in my community, if there was some campus organization, some campus entity that wanted to work around an issue, I would yearn for that. So creating spaces like this for forums on campus and off campus goes a long way.
That's awesome, thank you.